I would like to present a menu, so to speak, of the different kind of selves that we operate within, that we are a part of, and that we are produced from, so to speak, or that which we ourselves do produce. The different kind of selves that we experience as a self experience, because there's so much talk in spirituality about the true self and the false self, and there is also talk from the scientific community, of course, about what is the nature of self, where does it come from, and what is it that we can say constitutes a valid self. What is the self of the human being? So I would like to list up the menu in the restaurant, I would like to convey the different options that we have. And usually we think that we have to pick only one dish, that we have to pick only one course, but that's not the case. Everyone exists in all the different selves that we're talking about. It's simply a matter of what we identify with, and that is culturally based, and after has been culturally based, later on when we become aware, it can become individually based. I mean, personally, we can choose which kind of model for the self that we feel is the most appropriate and the most helpful and the most appropriate for us. So let's begin with our physicality, with our body. We are created by the nervous system and the brain. The human being is created and produced by the human program that produces the reality of the human being. Whether this reality is real or not, it doesn't matter. It is still the human program that produces it. We know from science that the reality that the human program produces, which means the world that we perceive and see as we perceive and see it, is not, of course, accurate. It's a cartoon that the brain creates. The brain creates the world that we see because that's the work of the brain, to make the world visible to us so that we can navigate in it and organize ourselves in it and escape from danger and try to survive as best we can, and even bring our own species forward, which they say is a very deep instinct in the human species and in every species. So if we look at it physically and from the point of view of the nervous system, we have to say that we have both an autonomic nervous system, which we cannot access. It is simply the secret invisible engine of the body that we do not have access to. This is the system that generates life as we get it, so to speak, because it controls heartbeat, heart rate, brain functions, digestion, breathing, all the things that we have to do in order to survive. This is done for us by the autonomic nervous system. Then we have a further other parts of the nervous system, the sympathetic, the parasympathetic, and the limbic system, and many parts of the nervous system that constitutes all our senses, so to speak. So that it makes it possible for us to experience the world as we experience it. The first thing that I would like to say is that the first and most precious self, we use the word self, the first and the most precious self that we can experience and have access to is what I've called before the paradise produced by the autonomic nervous system, which means the fact that we don't have to do anything ourselves. We can surrender to the fact that we are produced. We don't have to produce our own consciousness. We don't have to produce anything, because the autonomic nervous system is carrying us through life. And if we do not identify with the psychological self that we have up in our mind activity, then we can enjoy and feel the freedom of the paradise self, the no self that is constituted by the nervous system itself. And this is important to say because in Buddhism we talk about the non-self, that the self doesn't really exist. The self is just a flash, so to speak. It's something that appears and comes and goes. And behind that apparition of the self, there is actually no substance behind it. There is no permanence. There is no reality to it. It's just a bubble, a bubble in the bathtub, which is very true phenomenologically speaking, because of course, as we all know, the self, the psychological self, and the personality and individual self that we connect with and identify with so often is something that comes and goes. Experientially for us, especially, sometimes it's there, sometimes it's not there. When we sleep, it's not there, that's for sure. And many times during the day, it's not there either. So it's a bubble in the bathtub, it comes and goes. It is created and constituted by aspects of our brain, parts of our brain, that has this kind of activity that actually constitutes this experience of the self for us. That is what I'm coming to. That is what I'm coming to. So the first self is simply the paradise self, the freedom in us which is just there. We don't have to do anything to be a part of it. It is just delivered to us by the autonomic nervous system. In this realm, in this domain of the paradise self produced by the autonomic nervous system, we have the different selves of spirituality. The so-called true self, which also is a non-self in a way, because there's not much difference between the true self and the non-self, because the true self is the self which is clear of the psychological self. The true self is that which is not burdened by the mind self. The true self is that which is not burdened or polluted or disturbed by thinking, by mind activity. So the true self is the soul heart essence, as I many times say. The true self is the soul heart essence, and it's the inner core of the inner heart in man. That's what I say many times to describe this. And this is simply our own experience of our own beingness. This is our own experience of the beingness that is produced in us as beingness, which means that we are the experience of our own beingness, and that will be the true self of spirituality, in a sense. That in us which experiences the beingness. This is also the house or the space or the environment for PARABRAHMAN, the most sacred self, so to speak, or essence self in spirituality, the PARABRAHMAN self, that which you get to when you give up beingness. When you disidentify from your own beingness, you end up in PARABRAHMAN. You come to the nothingness or to the void. That is the true experience of consciousness. But we can say that it's not consciousness itself, it is the experience of consciousness. And at our most pure part, in our purest essential form, we are this. We are the experience of consciousness. I've said this many times in my videos, and I do believe it's right. We are the experience of our own consciousness. And in this experience of our own consciousness, we are pure. And this purity is the inner child of PARABRAHMAN, you could say, is the inner child of PARABRAHMAN. It's the pure essence, divine child of pure consciousness, of that which is in the first pure stage of consciousness, before consciousness gets polluted and disturbed by content, by mental content, by mind content. It's important to talk about this because it's important to demystify this. It's important to demystify the different selves that are available to us. Because spirituality says that, oh, it's divine, it comes from God. This self is God, God himself. This is the Brahman self. This is the God self in us. Yes, that might be true, but it is ultimately something that we experience. And that experience is produced in us. That experience of our own true self, whether it is God-like or not, whether it's divine or not, is something that is produced in us by our own capabilities to experience our own beingness and to experience our own consciousness. This is difficult for many people to listen to, and of course it's very difficult to understand, but it's difficult for many people to listen to, and a lot of people, and especially spiritual people, will reject this because they will say, oh, Christian, you're just a philosopher, you cannot stop thinking, that's your problem. No, it's not that at all. I'm a true scientist of the self, you know. I lay it out, I explain it so that even self-delusional people who believe that the self is only God or blah, 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 can see it for that which it truly is. We are the experience of this phenomenon. We experience that which we call God. We are the experience of our own experience. We are the experiencer of experience, you could say. We are the pure PARABRAHMAN self, you could say, the purest mirror of life, or the purest experiencer of experience inside of us. That is not, doesn't belong to religion, it actually belongs in a sense to science. But true spirituality is science, and of course Buddhism too is science at its essential core. Buddhism is science at its essential core. It's just that people are not educated about what Buddhism is. They just think about suffering or non-suffering, or Buddha or non-Buddha, or Nirvana or non-Nirvana, or blah, samsara, and blah, blah, blah. They don't really understand that Buddhism is actually a true scientific approach to the phenomena of life, which are mind-based, which are created by the mind, or which are created by the five khandhas, by the body, emotion, memory, perception, and consciousness. And feeling is, of course, a part of this. So Buddhism is a very precise instrument to look into these matters, but you have to find the right texts. You cannot just buy a book from the coffee shop about Buddhism, because that will probably be fake Buddhism. It will be Buddha Buddhism, you know, and that's not Buddhism. Buddhism is the true hardcore, clear-cut, analytical mind who sees through everything, you know, who cuts the cake, swish, swash, swoosh, you know, bing, bang, boom. This is how phenomena occur, and this is how they appear to us as experience. And this is, of course, precisely my point too, that whatever we experience, It's not possible actually to say if it is God or not. You know, it's not actually possible. That's just a projection, or let's say an interpretation of that which we experience. So the first self is you could say the PARABRAHMAN self, or the paradise self, that which is behind everything, that which is prior to beingness, that which is prior to consciousness. And then we have the Brahman self, the self of Muji and many spiritual people, which is actually just experience of beingness. That self, the self of Muji, is the experience of beingness, only that. And that is created and produced by the human program. It's created and produced by the human program, but In spirituality, we call it Brahman or God or true self simply because we experience it as something other than mind, but it's just a part of the five khandhas. It's just a part of that which is produced in the body. It's just a part of that which is produced by the totality of the human program. And we experience that. We see that, we have an experience of that. And because we have an experience of that, we can call that experience our own beingness, our own soul, the true heart, God in the curtain, God behind the curtain, God in the French fry, or God in the true sense of self. You get my point. We can interpret and project as much as we want, but it's still true that we have this experience and we make this projection, we make this experience into something and that which we make it into is based on our own interpretation, and our own interpretation is based on which guru we follow, which system we follow, which religion we follow, which ideology we follow, or which belief system we have. It's decided by which belief system we have. So the most easy thing when it comes to seeing the different kind of selves that we all live in, whether we like it or not, whether we are so-called self-realized or not, whether we live in the Brahman self or in the true self or in the PARABRAHMAN state or whatever, or in the psychological self as normal human beings, as 98% of the world population does. Then, if we want to see it clearly and easily, we will take a look at three selves. The first on top is the psychological self. That's our mind self, it's our identity self, it's our personality self, it's our everyday life self. It's the self that represents and produces everything that has become the individuality or the particularity, the particular aspect of our own individual experiences. And of course there might be influences from genes and DNA and stuff like that too. But so the first self is the psychological self, that which 98% of the world population live in, and we all have it, whether we like it or not, whether we want to be there or not, doesn't matter. And this is also the self that gets a neurosis from time to time. I've made a video about that too, about the neurosis of the self. And the neurosis of the self comes because of trauma, and because when we get stuck in certain patterns and programs because of trauma, or because of experience outside, or because of fake education, faulty education, lack of clarity, lack of education when it comes to understanding the true self, or the different selves that we live in and operate within. So the first self is the psychological self, that which we all have in our brain. It's created by our own brain. It's the result of it's the result of the totality of our own experiences, in a way. That's the psychological self. Then, as number two, in the middle, is the soul self, the heart self, the soul self, the heart self, the Brahman self, the experience of our own beingness. The soul, the heart, the beingness that we experience in ourselves. We come to this when we liberate ourselves from the psychological self, from the mind self, which is a very healthy, very good activity. No one should be afraid of doing that. It's a part of yoga, it's a part of meditation. It's about releasing ourselves that makes us stuck in mental patterns. Right? So we come down to the true self, so-called true self, to the soul, heart self, to that which is the experience of our own beingness. And then the self number three, which is to me the most interesting, or the most rewarding, you could say, the most healing and the most rewarding, is the experiencer of experience. It's the most naked part of us. It's that which I sometimes call the inner heart self, the sacred part of our inner heart is this self, the naked, subtle experience of experience itself. And this naked heart self is connected to the PARABRAHMAN, to that which is prior to consciousness, to the paradise self that is produced by the autonomic nervous system. So now I hope that I've been able to make it clear about the three main levels of self. And I hope, because of this model, that it will become possible for more people to access self number 2 and self number 3 by our own inner introspection, by the way that we organize and activate different parts of us inside our inner being, inside our inner heart. Because we have to learn to see without the mind. We have to learn to see without the eye. We have to learn to find the self behind the self. We have to learn to see the I behind the I. We have to learn to see the I that sees the I, and even to find the I that sees the I see. The I in us that can see the I in us that sees see. The I that sees the eyes seeing. We can see that which we see. And we can even see that with which we see that we see. And that is the real I. We don't have to get stuck in that. This is just simply an exercise to make the brain more flexible, to make ourselves more flexible in how we operate between the different kinds of selves, between the different kind of self-experience. So, as Nisargadatta Maharaj says, if you give up self, you get Brahman. If you give up self, which means if you give up beingness, because self in this sense is beingness. If you give up beingness, which means soul, heart, self, the Atman, if you give up Atman, if you give up your soul, if you give up your own beingness, the sense of beingness, the experience of beingness, if you give up that, you get Brahman. Brahman is the creator of the universe. Brahman is God, which means that which creates beingness. Brahman is that which creates beingness. Brahman is that which creates the world as it is. When you give up Brahman, when you give up God, when you give up the creator, you come to PARABRAHMAN, to that which is prior to consciousness, to that which existed before space took place. Then you come to the ultimate reality. The ultimate reality, as we say in Zen Buddhism or in normal Buddhism, the ultimate reality that we cannot see, the ultimate reality that is linked to the paradise that is produced by the autonomic nervous system. If you see this model, if you see how it is experientially in us, then it will be helpful. This is the totality of the main three kinds of selves that we operate within. And even if we have never heard about self number 3 that I'm talking about now, people think, oh no, that's too complicated, woo, oh, I don't know anything about that. Your body knows this very well. You are always in this self number 3. Your nervous system is locked within self number 3. You cannot escape paradise. You cannot escape that which is prior to consciousness, because you are something that exists within consciousness. You are a product that is produced by the nervous system and the brain. You are a product that is produced by the human program. But before you got produced by the human program, you belonged to an environment that is prior to consciousness, and that environment can be, for clarity's sake, we can say PARABRAHMAN, that which predates your own beingness, that which comes before your own existence. So that's also why many spiritual people say that actually you don't exist. We don't exist, and that's the key to freedom. The key to freedom is to understand that we actually don't exist. And why can we say that we don't exist? Because we don't have permanent existence. We don't have anything substantial. We are created by the brain and the mind and the nervous system. We are created as bubbles in the bathtub, you know. We are created as foam in the arena of the world. We come and go, and the experience that we have of ourselves and of the world also come and go. And the experience that we have of the psychological self comes and goes all the time. And the experience that we have of our own beingness self comes and goes all the time. The only thing that is constant, that is always here, whether we experience it or not, whether we like it or not, or whether we experience it or not, is that which is prior to consciousness. Ultimate reality is always here, but we are unaware that it is always here because we are born by the mind. We are produced and delivered to this world by the brain-mind machinery, so we cannot see that which is prior to consciousness unless we develop an inner introspective yoga, which means the ability to see ourselves at a deeper level. So this is the menu in the restaurant. This is the menu of the three different selves that we are a part of and that we are constituted by and in which we operate and live. We live within these three different aspects, whether we like it or not. We are connected to these three aspects, whether we like it or not. And it is up to us how we want to control or modify our own beingness and existence within this model. It's basically all you can do, you know. All the self-help industry is, of course, in the psychological self domain, but it touches down also on the soul-heart domain, and it even goes down to the PARABRAHMAN and Paradise domain at some points. But there's no clarity about it, so I wanted to make a model as the person who is the first person in the whole world that has created a menu like this. If I can be proud of something that I did in this life, then I could say that, ooh, I'm the first person in this world who made a menu of the three different main categories of self that we are and have and live in and operate within. And of course, as we know from science and from neuroscience especially, it's a dance. Life is a dance. It's a movement between these three domains. Life is a movement between these three domains, and we cannot change the fact that life is a movement between these three domains because we are created and constituted by the brain and the nervous system, by the human program that produce us, and which also not only produce us as we are, here and now, today, and in every situation, but it also, the human program is that which produces us as we are in any given moment, but it also delivers the world to us. So it's up to us, through our own introspective exercise, through our own abilities of seeing ourselves, inside ourselves, how we want to connect to, identify with, and also, most importantly, disidentify with that which we do not want. We want to lessen the burden of this. We want to lessen the importance of that. We want to reduce the suffering that comes from this identification. We want to reduce stress. We want to increase self-awareness. We want to increase our own ability to experience our own beingness as something sacred for our own selves, for our own heart feeling. And we want, maybe, I hope, to increase our own ability to connect with and be with, and perhaps even identify as beings that are connected to the paradise self, because that is ultimately that which can give us more freedom, a greater degree of freedom, and that is also that which leads to the true self state, which we say in spirituality. You will come to the true self state if you're able to do that, if you're able to identify yourself into that which is true self-related and disidentify yourself with that which is mind-related. You leave the mind and enter the self, so to speak. You leave the mind and you enter the self. So this was a presentation that I think actually is very funny and a little bit brave to do, because it's a taboo to do things like this. It's a taboo in the world of spirituality to do things like this, and it's also a taboo in the world of science, you could say, because science is not actually science when it comes to psychology and the self. It's like a kindergarten. Science is made by scientists who are immature and childish and who has actually no real true life experience and no real true life knowledge. They just work within a certain discourse, and they develop new paradigms slowly, little by little, by being able to modify their discourse by being parasites on other people's work and blah blah. That's basically what science is in many cases. So we need to find a person who can stand right in the middle between spirituality and science and say, hello, sweetie, this is the menu. This is the restaurant. These are your options. It's, of course, hubris, and it's too much, and I shouldn't say it, and I'm sure I will be blamed for it, but never mind. I have laid out a totality of the three different main domains of self-experience. These are the three different domains of self-experience that are the main, that constitutes the main categories, the main categories, the main domains of different self-experience, and a different conceptualization of that which we, through our experience, call and relate to as the self, or as that essential part of us which we call the self. So I thank you very much, actually, if you've been able to listen to this presentation, because I think that it's very worthwhile and people can think on it and develop it further. Please do that, develop it further, and see that science and spirituality can go hand in hand and absolutely should go hand in hand. Science and spirituality should go hand in hand. Neuroscience is nothing without metaphors to explain neuroscience. And the metaphors that explain neuroscience is, of course, psychology in particular, but also spirituality. Spirituality and religion is also a set of metaphors that explains what happens in our neurocircuitry, in our brains, and neuroscience can, to a large part, convey that. If not explain it, at least they can convey it, they can show it, they can translate their findings into things that we can understand and see as models for how the brain works. And this will also show us why spirituality is important for us, why it has been important for us, and why sometimes we get deluded by it. We get deluded by our own concepts and by other people's concepts. We get deluded by this and that. That's our predicament in life. We get deluded all the time. But we also are able and should be able to cut through the chase, to cut the cake, so to speak. So we need to, for the sake of clarity, do as much as we can to create clarity, to make difficult things clear. So this is a true attempt from me to make a model of the three main different kinds of self that we operate in and live with and experience in our own inner heart, true self state. Thank you. Thank you very much.